All right, and I am done. So I just finished up The Blinding Knife by Brent Weeks. This is the second in the Lightbringer series, and I loved this book. This is a 5 out of 5. Like, not the highest of the 5 out of 5s, but it's definitely a 5 out of 5. I absolutely loved it. I had a little bit of skepticism going into this book because I had some problems with the first book. I gave the first book a 4 out of 5, and but I was really disappointed by the first book because I felt like it had so much promise. There were some major problems with it. I felt like that prevented it from being up there, but the promise of it really left me disappointed that it didn't achieve that. And I was worried that those problems would turn into a weaker book here, like down into the 3 out of 5 category. Some of those problems I had was that the pacing was all off. It was way too fast. They took some major spoilers, not spoilers, but major surprises, and they threw them out way too early. I felt like they could have been savored a little bit and spent later on in the book to make it better. And I felt like the ending was weak. This book solved those problems. This book didn't have any of those issues and fixed them all out. I was worried when I started this book because it started out with a frenetic pace. It was going hot, but it slowed down right afterwards. And I really appreciated that slower pace throughout the, like, kind of right after the beginning up through the middle of the book. And what it ultimately did was it made it so that the really impactful moments would be more meaningful. And that's something that I really appreciate as a reader and something that I was really hungry for in the first book. They did a good job at spacing out the big revelations and left the biggest of the revelations for the very end of the book, which I feel like is always a really good strategy for a book that still has several books left to go. It ends on one of those really positive notes where you're hungry for the next book. I want to be hungry for the next book. I don't want to be left at the end of the book feeling any sort of downer at all. I want to feel that excitement, and I got that here. I really enjoyed the dynamic between Kip and his grandfather in this book. This is a non-spoiler review, so I'm not going to ruin anything, and it doesn't spoil anything to say that those two interact quite a bit in this book, and it hits you in a lot of unexpected places. You're kind of set up to believe that that dynamic is going to go one direction, and because of knowing how fantasy books typically go, but it goes in the opposite direction, and I really enjoy the direction that it went and how they played off each other, and it made me appreciate both of those characters a lot more because of that dynamic that I got. I also really enjoyed the dynamic between Kip and the school, and I'm a sucker for that. I feel like it's written like just for me. I love a fantasy character going through a school where they are the gifted and they have to prove themselves. Something about that trope really resonates with me, and I really like it, and it was done really well here. I think a lot of fantasy excels with this, and this was no exception. So I really appreciated that dynamic. I'm a little sad that, it's the whole book's not about schooling. It's clearly just in this book. But I'm hopeful for the future books because this book really sold me on Brent Weeks as an author, and I have faith that he'll continue doing good things with the series. I mentioned before, but I thought the surprises in this book were very well paced out. The biggest surprises at the end. There's a couple spaced out through the middle that I really enjoyed, but it felt like the pacing it hit the right chord. I didn't mention this before, but it was certainly true in the first book. But Kip has this inner monologue that is so rare for fantasy. Inner monologues are not a new thing, or not like this isn't the first time an inner monologue is used extensively. But typically what you see in a fantasy book is people doubting the main character, and the main character has this high confidence internally where that's what you hear. This is the opposite. You hear a lot of people talking up this character, and you hear a lot of self-doubt in the inner monologue, a lot of chastising of themselves, a bit unfairly. But I like that. I like that Kip is not a perfect hero. I like that he is in his mind, he's unattractive. In his mind, he's not in good physical shape. In his mind, he has a bad confidence. And I like that. It's different and fresh, and it makes me like Kip more for that aspect. There's a character that gets brought up in this book called Gunner. I won't ruin anything because he's awesome. But I like what Brent Weeks did here. He did something that I think Brandon Sanderson does really well in the Stormlight archive, where Brandon uses these things he calls interludes, and he'll bring up a character that doesn't feel connected to the book. And it's just kind of this world building where it shows a totally different part of the world and this different character, and just a short little story about that character. And I love it. But sometimes that character comes relevant later on, sometimes not. In this book, Gunner was brought up. It's random. It feels totally out of place. But it's this really interesting short story a couple different times where you're engaged. Gunner's awesome. And, you could read a whole book about Gunner. But the short, high pace that story of Gunner goes through, it's just, you just have a huge smile on your face. And to see where that goes, it's clear that he's going to show up later. But he does show up later in the book. And it's done in a really innovative way, and I love that style that's used here. I don't know that it can be replicated again. Maybe it will, but I love what Brent Weeks did with that character. I will say that the one criticism I have for this book is there is a final battle in this book, and I didn't like the way it was written. And part of that might be my bias, and I'm not a big fan of battle sequences in fantasy books. Sometimes I like them when I feel like it's like the pinnacle. I just reviewed Wrath by John Gwynne, and he does battle sequences so well. People like Joe Abercrombie does it really well. I don't feel like this is where Brent Weeks has his strong suit. I end up kind of bored through the battle sequences. I get kind of lost on what's going on, and I go back to wishing that political dynamic between characters was the focus, and it leaves me hungry to go back to that. It wasn't so bad that it left me feeling negatively towards this book in any way, but I just feel like that goes to say how good the rest of the book is, that this didn't drag it down. Ultimately, I'm very excited about this series. My faith is totally renewed. I'm extremely excited about the direction the series is going. Looking at the Goodreads reviews, every book gets a higher review, I believe, but the last book gets tanked a little bit, and that worries me. I have heard, I try to go into book series without knowing anything about the plot, just totally blind, and that's true for here. I have no idea what this is about when I went into it, and I love going into it totally blind like that. But I did hear that the last book is the weakest of the series, and I hate that. I want the last book to be the strongest of the series. I'd love the first book to be the weakest, and then to improve over time. I just mentioned that I just got done reviewing The Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne, and that was the case where every book got better than the last, and that's the best kind of series. So I am worried about the last book here, but I'm definitely going to read it. I'm fully confident that I'm going to love this next book and the fourth book based on how these other two were. My reviews typically kind of, they don't always mimic exactly what something like Goodreads will do. But in general, when Goodreads has higher scores than previous books, I generally agree that they're better, or at least more entertaining to me. So I'm excited. I'm all about this book. I feel like more people should read it, and I think you should too. So that's my review, and I hope you enjoyed it.